November 22nd, 1932, in Washington. A folder with a world-famous name lands on a desk. No sirens, just paper, quietly deciding who belongs. It looks routine. Memos, forms, polite language, careful signatures. But bureaucracy is a quiet weapon able to delay, doubt, and block you without ever proving anything. It starts with outrage in an envelope, someone claiming danger, demanding action. Once the stamp hits the page, a rumor stops being gossip and becomes an official file. One phone call sets the chain in motion. Check his associations. Check his friends. Each step sounds lawful until you realize the goal is to stop him before he arrives. No locks, no chains, just cabinets. But a file can become its own vault, sealing a person inside suspicion the moment their name is indexed. A newspaper story gets clipped and filed like it's a fact. It's not proof, just ink. But inside a dossier, ink can start to look like a verdict. In this kind of system, what matters isn't what you did. It's who you knew, who praised you, who quoted you association, turned into suspicion by design. The border isn't a fence, it's a desk. One stamp, one note, one delay, and a person can be stopped without ever seeing the person who stopped them. Just one more check, they say again and again. Background reviews can stretch forever because suspicion has no deadline once it's written down. The language stays polite. Inquiry, review, concern, but the effect is accusation wrapped in manners, delivered like routine. Einstein isn't chased for a crime in the streets. He's reframed on paper scientists to suspect because ideas can scare people more than weapons. A dossier doesn't need new facts to grow. It feeds on repetition, each copy of a claim, making the claim feel more real. No single step looks dramatic. That's the trick. A chain of small decisions, each reasonable, can quietly become a wall. Then they widen the lens. Not just him, his friends, his colleagues, anyone who wrote him a letter or shared a stage. A single note in the margin can steer everything. Watch closely. Potential risk. It's not evidence, but it changes the tone of every page after. They don't have to say no. They can say, not yet. In bureaucracy, delay can function like denial: clean, quiet, and hard to challenge. Here's the twist. The border isn't at the coast or the airport. It's here at a desk where a clerk can turn movement into a question mark. Once you're filed under concern, the file behaves like gravity. It pulls every future decision toward caution, even when nothing new is proven. Nothing has to be conclusive. The file only has to be thick. In bureaucracy, accumulation can imitate certainty weight standing in for truth. The questions aren't neutral anymore. Is he connected? Starts to sound like he must be. And that shift happens without anyone saying it out loud. Somewhere in the chain, the file reaches a consulate desk. One clerk, one pause, one extra review, and the world-famous physicist becomes a question mark. Redactions feel like black ice, smooth, silent, dangerous. You can't argue with what you can't see, and that's how a file protects itself. There's always a drawer for just in case. Once you're in it, you don't need to be guilty, only inconvenient. No courtroom, no testimony, just paperwork. The real trial happens here, a reputation judged by clippings, accusations, and associations. A rumor doesn't need proof to travel. It only needs a route desk to desk, office to office, until the paperwork itself feels like authority. Suspicion becomes a checklist. If you can tick enough boxes, meetings, letters, affiliations, you can label a person without ever proving a crime. Then comes the most revealing instruction: check the friends. It sounds procedural, but it turns relationships into liabilities. The wording stays clean. We request information. We recommend review. But clean words can hide dirty intentions. Stop him quietly, without saying why. In a bureaucracy, thickness can look like truth. A heavy file feels convincing, even if it's built from repeats, clippings, and concerns that were never proven. Security is the perfect shortcut word. It doesn't need details, it just needs agreement, and once everyone nods, the file gets power it didn't earn. On paper, A human being becomes categories, sympathies, associations, risk. It's easier to fear a label than to understand a person. The system loves a paper trail because it looks disciplined, but a trail can lead anywhere, especially when the first step was just a rumor. One claim becomes 2, then 5, then 20 carbon copies, turning suspicion into an echo. The louder the echo, the more real it feels inside the file. A telegram arrives, and suddenly a rumor wears a uniform. It's still just words, but delivered in a format that makes people treat it like fact. Redactions don't just hide information, they protect decisions. When you can't see the reasoning, you can't challenge the outcome. Nobody has to shout, "Ban him." A soft pencil note is enough, one extra doubt, one extra delay until the system quietly becomes the stop sign. One label can do more damage than an argument. Undesirable. It doesn't prove anything. It just gives the system permission to treat a person like a problem. Rules meant for border control become a net for reputation. If you can't accuse someone in court, you try to catch them in paperwork instead. A call comes in, a note gets written, and suddenly it's on record. That's the magic and the danger of bureaucracy. It turns conversation into evidence. No single page proves anything, but together they create a feeling, an atmosphere of guilt. And in some offices, that feeling is enough to act. No questions are asked to the person himself. The interrogation happens under a lamp, pages judged in silence, as if paper could speak for a human being. The moment a name is flagged, everything changes. Future decisions start with suspicion, and the person has no idea the switch was flipped. A stranger writes, "I'm warning you." The system treats it like civic duty, but sometimes it's just fear, looking for a target, and bureaucracy gives it a path. They don't need to deny entry loudly. They can bury the request under review until the answer becomes silence, a soft band made of waiting. The dossier moves like a relay baton, desk to desk, office to office. And with every handoff, the suspicion feels more official, even if nothing new is learned. Bureaucracy rarely says, "Stop him." It asks questions that lean toward one answer: have we checked enough? Until enough means don't risk it. A headline becomes a character witness, except it never swears an oath. The file treats publicity like proof, and reputation gets tried by paper fragments. No one needs to confront him face to face. The system builds an invisible wall made of memos, doubts, and concerns, and calls it procedure. At some point, the file stops describing a person and starts defining him. The dossier becomes the version of Einstein that the system chooses to believe. Just in case feels responsible in the moment, but it's also how fear spreads, turning caution into punishment without ever admitting it's punishment. The process has no villain in a hat. It's faceless slots, trays, signatures, and that's why it's so hard to fight. Nobody feels like the decision maker. In the middle of all this, the science disappears. The work that changed the world gets replaced by categories and rumors because bureaucracy doesn't measure brilliance. On a board like this, a reputation hangs on a wire. Connections become accusations, and the web starts to feel like certainty. The same claim returns in new packaging, copied, underlined, repeated. It's not stronger evidence, it's just the same suspicion, louder. Not everything is written. Some of it moves by whispers, "Be careful, don't sign it yet." A shadow system that leaves no fingerprints. Procedure can be a cover. If everything looks orderly, trays, stamps, forms, then harm can happen quietly while everyone insists they followed the steps. The strangest part is, he's not even there. The person never enters the room, only the paperwork does, standing in as judge, jury, and witness. If the system admits doubt, it loses authority. So it chooses delay, deflection, and endless checking anything except saying, "We don't actually know." Once suspicion exists, it pulls everything toward it. Neutral facts get interpreted through the file like gravity bending light around a dark mass. In this world, suspicious can mean anything: who you spoke to, what you signed, what you refused to condemn. Ordinary life becomes evidence by definition. There's a pipeline for outrage. Mail arrives, complaints get sorted, and suddenly private fear becomes public record. The stamp turns emotion into information. A single form can freeze a future. It's just paper until it decides whether you move, whether you teach, whether you escape danger. The request sounds friendly. Could you provide more information? But it's a tactic: ask for more, delay more, and let time do the blocking. In bureaucracy, maybe can quietly become no, not through a decision, but through delay until the opportunity expires and nobody admits they caused it. Once the system learns your name, it remembers it. And the memory isn't human, it's mechanical, ready to reappear whenever someone asks the wrong question. Review sounds harmless, even responsible, but for the person waiting, it's lost time, lost safety, and a future held hostage by a folder. The scariest part is how easy it is to game. Send enough concerned letters, and you can manufacture a dossier out of thin air. When people can't defeat an idea, they attack the person who represents it. The scientist becomes a symbol, and symbols are easier to block than facts. People imagine borders as fences, but sometimes the doorway is made of forms, layers of paper that you can't push through, no matter how patient you are. A dossier becomes a filter. It decides what gets attention and what gets stuck, because once you're flagged, everything you do is read as suspicious. The worst part of bureaucracy is the unanswered question: who decided this? The hallway stays silent because the decision is spread across too many hands. Once suspicion touches a name, it stains like permanent ink. Even if nothing is proven, the mark stays ready to be referenced again. The fear of 1932 won't last forever, but the file might. Paper outlives panic, and that's why dossiers can become time bombs in a quiet cabinet. Paper looks neutral, clean, quiet, polite. But paper is never neutral when it carries a judgment, especially one the person can't see or challenge. A whole life gets reduced to a summary page, and summaries are dangerous because they're where bias can hide in a few confident sentences. When the stamp lands, it can feel like fate. Not because it's true, but because the system treats ink as the final word. Nobody says no directly. They send you on a detour, another office, another form, another wait, until the journey becomes the barrier. Control doesn't always look violent. Sometimes it looks calm, neat stacks, polite letters, perfect order while a person's future quietly disappears. The file isn't written by physics or facts. It's written by fear, by what people imagine, what they assume, and what they want to prevent. Decades later, the paperwork survives in a vault, and it tells a clear lesson. You can try to stop a person at the border with paper alone. There's a date on the page, November 22nd, 1932. One line in ink, and suddenly, a world-famous scientist is treated like a risk to manage. A stamp doesn't just mark paper, it sounds like a door closing. No argument, no hearing, just a neat action that changes the outcome. Your passport says who you are. The dossier becomes a shadow passport deciding who you're allowed to be in the eyes of the system. Everything can be legal on paper and still feel wrong in reality. That's the danger. Procedure can look clean, while justice never even enters the room. Ink travels faster than people. A memo can cross offices in minutes, shaping decisions long before the person it describes ever arrives to speak for himself. A thick file feels like authority. People trust its weight, even when the weight comes from repetition, not from facts tested in daylight. The guard at the border doesn't need a uniform. Sometimes it's paper lines on forms that can stop a human being without ever meeting them. Concern is a quiet threat word. It sounds mild, but it can trigger a whole machine: calls, memos, delays without anyone proving a single charge. A paperclip, a tray, a stamped note, tiny motions with massive consequences. In the right office, a life can be paused indefinitely by something that looks like routine. In the FBI vault, the file still exists, proof that bureaucracy can target anyone, even a genius, through rumor dressed as procedure. The warning is simple: paper can become a border.